it's time for a list of facts that you may have missed in your history class in public school. Democrats fought to expand slavery. Republicans fought to end it. Democrats passed the Black Codes and the Jim Crow laws. Democrats supported and passed the Missouri Compromise to protect slavery. Democrats supported and passed the Kansas-Nebraska Act to expand slavery. They supported and backed the Dred Scott decision. They opposed educating blacks and murdered our teachers. They fought against anti-lynching laws. Senator Robert Byrd of West Virginia, of course, well known for having been a Kleagle, that's a recruiter, in the KKK. Also, Robert Byrd of West Virginia personally filibustered the Civil Rights Act of 1964 for 14 straight hours to keep it from passage. Democrats passed the Repeal Act of 1894 that overturned the civil rights laws enacted by Republicans. Democrats declared they would rather vote for a yellow dog than vote for a Republican because the Republican Party was known to be the party for blacks. Democrat President Woodrow Wilson reintroduced segregation throughout the federal government immediately upon taking office in 1913. He said that blacks would spread disease. Progressive President Woodrow Wilson. Democrat President Franklin Delano Roosevelt's first appointment to the Supreme Court was a life member of the KKK, Senator Hugo Black, Democrat of Alabama. Democrat President Franklin D. Roosevelt's choice for vice president in 1944 was Harry Truman, who had joined the KKK in Kansas City in 1922. Democrat President Franklin D. Roosevelt resisted Republican efforts to pass a federal law against lynching. Did you get that? FDR resisted Republican efforts to pass a federal law against lynching. Democrat President Franklin D. Roosevelt opposed integration of the armed forces. Democrat Senators Sam Ervin, Al Gore Sr., and Robert Byrd were the chief opponents of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. Democrats supported and backed Judge John Ferguson in the case of Plessy versus Ferguson. Democrats supported the school board of Topeka, Kansas, in the case of Brown versus the Board of Education. Democrat Public Safety Commissioner Eugene Bull Connor in Birmingham, Alabama, unleashed vicious dogs and turned fire hoses on black civil rights demonstrators. Democrats, who were Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and other protesters, Democrats were the people who Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and other protesters were fighting. Democrat Governor Georgia Governor Lester Maddox brandished an axe handle to prevent blacks from patronizing his restaurant. Democrat Governor George Wallace stood in front of the Alabama schoolhouse in 1963, declaring that there would be segregation forever. Democrat Arkansas Governor Faubus tried to prevent desegregation of the Little Rock public schools. Democrat Senator John F. Kennedy voted against the 1957 Civil Rights Act. Democrat President John F. Kennedy also opposed the 1963 March on Washington by Dr. King, which was one of the seminal moments in American history. Democrat John F. Kennedy had Dr. King wiretapped and investigated by the FBI. Democrat President Bill Clinton's mentor was U.S. Senator J. William Fulbright, an Arkansas Democrat and a supporter of racial segregation. Democrat President Bill Clinton interned for J. William Fulbright from 1966 to 67. Democrat Senator J. William Fulbright signed the Southern Manifesto, opposing the Supreme Court's 1954 Brown versus Board of Education decision. Democrat Senator J. William Fulbright joined with the Dixiecrats in filibustering the Civil Rights Act of 1957 and 64. Democrat Senator J. William Fulbright voted against the 1965 Voting Rights Act. Southern Democrats opposed desegregation and integration. Democrats also opposed the Emancipation Proclamation, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, the Reconstruction Act of 67, that's 1867, the Civil Rights Act of 1866, the Enforcement Act of 1870, the Forced Act of 1871, the KKK Act of 1871, the Civil Rights Act of 1875, the Freeman Bureau, the Civil Rights Act of 1957 and 1960, the United States Civil Rights Commission. Republicans, on the other hand, gave strong bipartisan support and sponsorship for the following legislation: the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the 1968 Civil Rights Act, the Equal Opportunity Act of 1972, Goals and Timetables for Affirmative Action Programs, Comprehensive Employment Training Act of 1973, Voting Rights Act Amendment of 1982, Civil Rights Act of 1983, Federal Contract Compliance and Workforce Development Act of 1988. Republicans enacted civil rights laws in the 50s and the 60s over the objections of Democrats. Republicans founded the historical black colleges and universities and started the NAACP to counter the racist practices of Democrats. Republicans pushed through much of the groundbreaking civil rights legislation in Congress. They fought slavery. They amended the Constitution to grant blacks freedom, citizenship, and the right to vote. That's the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. They pushed through much of the groundbreaking civil rights legislation from the 1860s all the way to the 1960s. It was Dwight D. Eisenhower who sent troops into the South to desegregate the schools. It was he who appointed Chief Justice Earl Warren to the Supreme Court, which resulted in the Brown versus Board of Education decision. Republican Senator Everett Dirksen from Illinois, not President Lyndon Johnson, was the one who was responsible for pushing through the civil rights laws of the 1960s. As a matter of fact, he wrote the language for the 1965 Voting Rights Act, that racist Republican. Senator Everett Dirksen from Illinois also crafted the language for the Civil Rights Act of 1968, which prohibited discrimination in housing. And it was Republican and black American A. Philip Randolph who organized the 1963 march by Dr. King in Washington. By the way, Dr. King was also a Republican. The 1964 Civil Rights Act roll call vote in the House, only 64% of the Democrats voted yes, but 80% of the Republicans voted yes. The Senate, while only 68% of the Democrats endorsed the bill, 82% of the Republicans voted to enact it. Thaddeus Stevens, a radical Republican, that introduced legislation to give African Americans the so-called 40 acres and a mule, and Democrats overwhelmingly voted against the bill. During the Senate debates on the KKK Act of 1871, it was revealed that members of the Democrat Party formed many terrorist organizations like the KKK to murder and intimidate African American voters. The KKK Act was a bill introduced by a Republican Congress to stop the Klan. History also reveals that Democrats lynched, burned, mutilated, and murdered thousands of blacks and completely destroyed entire towns and communities occupied by middle-class blacks, including Rosewood, Florida, the Greenwood District in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and Wilmington, North Carolina, just to name a few. History reveals, by the way, they also attacked Republicans. History reveals that it was abolitionists and radical Republicans such as Henry L. Morehouse and General Oliver Howard who started many of the traditional black colleges, while Democrats fought to keep them closed. Many of our traditional black colleges are named after white Republicans. After exclusively giving the Democrats their votes for the past 25 years, the average African American cannot point to one piece of civil rights legislation sponsored solely by the Democrat Party that was specifically designed to eradicate the unique problems that African Americans face today. Just thought you might have missed some of that during your history class in public school.